Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Go ahead and give me a shout out where you streaming in from, and give me a little hello. I always love hearing from you in the chat. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to this channel and press the little like button. That helps us get this information out to all the artists out there in the world looking for it. So good to see you all this morning. And I guess I've been asking you all where you're from, and I'm in the New York City area. So good morning from New York. I know it's very early morning for some of you on the West Coast, and a little later in the afternoon for some of you in Europe. So thank you all for joining us today for these lessons. And good morning from Pennsylvania. um, I am getting a really strange situation here with my technology where it's overlapping all your comments, and so I'm only seeing like a word or two of them. So I'm going to try something here. Oh, I'm just okay. Well, whatever that did, it appears to have fixed it. Okay, we're just gonna roll with it. I'm still learning. I'm still learning the software, this technology. I found that I used to make these like really labored, high edited videos, and then I was reluctant to do them because I hate editing, right? And so I'm like, well, if I live stream, then I don't have to do the edit. So we're trying it out, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, today we are going to continue painting our ground plane, and in particular, this cast shadow. I did put the onion out, by the way, the people who told me yesterday to put the onion out for my throat, and it was amazing. So thank you. Okay, so focus, Mandy. Cast shadow. So yesterday we kind of gave some numbers, some value numbers of what we were doing. And we talked a little bit about the cast shadow. So the cast shadow, remember, the closer it is to the object casting it, in this case, our sphere is casting this core shadow. So the closer the shadow is to the object casting it, typically the darker it is in value and the sharper it is in the edge. And the further away it gets, the lighter the value and the softer the edge. And this is because light isn't just hitting our sphere, it's also hitting here, and it's hitting here, and it's hitting here. And not only is it hitting other places, but it's bouncing. So the further the cast shadow gets away from your object, the more opportunity there is for this bouncing light to get in there. And that's what creates both the softer edge and a slightly lighter value as it goes away from our object. So we're going to work on doing the cast shadow, and also we're going to work on finishing the ground plane. So yesterday we said that the ground plane was going from approximately a 1.5 to a 2, and then from front to back from a 2 to a 3.5. So I think what I'm going to do is just finish painting this really quick. We already discussed that in the last stream, so we don't need to spend too much time on it. We do want to pay attention, however, when I get back here to how this plane is meeting that plane, because it's going to create an edge. And we're going to talk about what our options are when we have a ground plane meeting a back plane. Okay, so I'm just going to hop to it here. Yesterday, I yapped a whole lot and we didn't paint a ton, so I'm hoping to give you a little bit more of the painting today. I did remix my palette, and this time I mixed all 9 values. When you are mixing the palette, and we did this in our first video, so if you want more detail, go check out the episode number 1 on painting the sphere. So this time I mixed out a 9-step scale just because we're going to start getting maybe into some more nuanced things. When I first mixed it, I only mixed a 5-step scale. When you're mixing, you have your white, your black. You want to find the halfway point, and then the halfway point between your halfway, and then the halfway. Did I do that too many times? So you want to find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you find your halfway point and mix that. Then the halfway between your halfway, and then the halfway between your halfway, right? The reason for this is that if you just start at 9 and start mixing, students tend to make them way too dark. It's like they'll be really, really dark and then suddenly go to white at the end, right? So by mixing the halfway and then the halfway between the halfway, you're more likely to get an even value scale that doesn't skew too dark. Oops, I just painted my computer. um, all right, so I'm just going to finish going across here. We said this is 1.5 to 2. So I'm going to start with that. Oops, I had a little bit of black paint on my brush from yesterday. All right, so I started off on a bad note for my first because I wasn't paying attention to what color was on my brush because I didn't wash it, and this is way too dark. So I'm going to have to throw some pure white on top of it to lighten it. So this is mixing on the canvas. I typically avoid doing this. I don't teach doing this, but sometimes if you make a mistake, that's the choice you have. Another option is that I could use my palette knife and scrape it off, so that there's not so much paint to have to mix on top of there. All right, so making some adjustments. We often talk in Atelier Land about starting slow to finish fast, and this is a great example of that, right? I was in a hurry to start painting this ground plane, and what did I do? I didn't pay attention to what was on my brush. All right, again, I'm going to use a smaller brush to kind of close in on the sphere when I'm ready for that, but for now, I'm just going to let it be. And I'm just slowly working my way over, and I just graduate. This is a very subtle gradient from 1.5 to 2. Got something in my paint here. I don't know if that was just like some dry paint that somehow got in there or what. We don't want that. Okay. All right, so we have the ground plane moving slightly darker as it moves across here, and then it also needs to move back into space. Oh, and there's a comment in the chat that you can also use Gamma-Sol to remove paint. You can. I just try to not put additives anywhere on my canvas anytime I can get away from it. So if nothing else works, sure, I'll use Gamma-Sol, but I try really hard to be just a purist when it comes to painting, like pigment, oil, canvas, right? Because we know that that works long term. We don't have a ton of data on any of these other additives for the paint over time, and I find that I just want to keep it simple. Like I don't want to deal with like 100 different things to maybe add or adjust on my paint. Now, other painters are like materials focused, which is amazing. They can do some incredible techniques with those materials, but that's not the type of painter that I am. I like to keep it simple and focus on the visual problem. Okay. So as we go back here in space, we're going all the way to a 3.5. So I'm working down my palette. This is my 3 here. And all right, so as I get to my 3.5, I'm going to start meeting this back plane. And whenever you have one color meeting another color, you need to decide how they are going to meet. Oh, welcome, Karine. Good to see you. So we need to decide how they're going to meet. Is it going to be a very sharp edge? Is it going to be a soft edge? Are we going to paint it exactly the way we see it? Or are we going to use some theory about how we see it? Now, at first, in order, because this is a demonstration, I'm going to show you what a fairly sharp, I'm not going to make it crazy sharp, but I'm going to do what most students do and make it pretty even and fairly sharp when it meets this other area. And then we'll talk about what that does. All right, so that's fairly sharp. Okay. Now, is it horrible that we have this big sharp line on the edge? It's not terrible, but it is doing a few things visually, and we need to pay attention to what those things are. So, first of all, do you see how it's making a really sharp point as it meets our sphere here? And this is because you have a sharp edge between the ground plane and the back plane, and it's also sharply meeting the edge of our sphere here. Now, it's not that we don't see it, but I'm seeing that the edge getting a lot softer than what we have it, especially as it approaches the sphere. And there's a technique that artists use sometimes that's called passage. And it means that they don't want a distraction point. They don't want something that's going to really attract your eye as your background is meeting your object. So what they'll do is they'll purposefully obfuscate the edge as it approaches an object, just so that we don't get one of these sharp points that starts to draw your eye away from the main subject here. So I'm going to get a smaller brush, make sure that I actually have the right color on it this time. Okay. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, first of all, I'm going to carefully approach the sphere, because remember, the sphere drawing is sacred. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to intentionally create passage. I'm going to create almost a disappearing edge from the back plane to the front plane. So this is called passage, when you don't let something have a point on it when you're working, when two planes are meeting, especially if they aren't important to your subject. You know, I don't need this big point distracting from my subject matter there. So like with all edges, you know, passage is just a really, really soft edge. So it's a little bit of push and pull from both sides. And again, being very mindful anytime you're near your sphere to be careful, because that sphere drawing is sacred. Okay, so do you see how that edge just disappeared? This is passage. I love passage. I love, you know, when my background is atmospheric. I love when it comes and goes. So this is one technique that artists use. Sometimes you actually see it. In this case, we actually see it. That back edge is very, very soft and kind of disappears. Sometimes it's the very sharp edge. Let's say that wasn't cloth back there. Let's say it was two pieces of wood meeting, a back piece and a ground plane piece. Then it would be really sharp, but you still might choose to intentionally soften it just to keep the focus on your sphere. Okay, now I need to decide how hard or soft I want the rest of this, because in my drawing here, or what I'm observing, it's a much softer meet between the back plane and the ground plane. Now, the problem when you start having a soft edge where two planes meet is that you start to lose the drawing. So the hard part for us today is going to be to keep this edge looking parallel. So it still needs to read like a line when we squint down, when we do our magic atelier squint that we talked about yesterday, where we close our eyes really, really, really tight and just barely open them. When we do that squint, it still needs to read that it's a horizontal line. Often when students start softening this edge, the line starts tilting up or down, or it starts migrating up. You know, it'll be horizontal, but it'll start migrating up or down, right? So we want the illusion of the line to stay exactly where we have it. We just want to soften the edge. And this is its own skill. It usually takes students a few attempts to get it right. And often you have to like way get it wrong before you learn how to see how to get it right. All right, so I am just starting to soften this edge, and I'm going to work from both sides. So I'm starting working the top down, and then I'm going to push the back plane back up. Because remember, I want it to stay in the same place. I just want the edge to be softer. So do you see how this edge right now, do you see how when you squint your eyes, the edge is going like this and then it whoops, it dips a little bit, right? This is what I'm talking about as you're working on your edge work. So I'm going to continue working across here first, and then I'm going to work on straightening the edge. So I'm going to soften it, and then I'm going to work on the illusion of the line, because right now the illusion is going kind of curving up and then curving down. And this is a very, very subtle thing. This is something that usually takes students, quite a few months of practice with controlling their paint before they can really master edge work. I do encourage you. It's wonderful that you're here, and I hope you're learning so much. I hope you're practicing with us. Even if you don't have oil paint, do it with pencil. This is grisaille. You can, practice all these same concepts just with a pencil and paper by your computer while we're going through this. I got fuzz. I had a dog visit my studio the other day, and I think that might have been a mistake because I'm finding hair everywhere. I don't have any pets of my own, so some painters just go with it, right? If they have cats or whatever, that it's part of it. I'm just not used to that particular problem. All right. So I cannot emphasize enough with atelier training. There's a reason that you train with a master artist for years, because you're dealing with hundreds of years of handed down artistic information. And there's two things that you need to know. You need to get the information, which is what you're getting now. And that's amazing that you're here. But you also need someone to help you correct the information as you're practicing. And that's what we offer in the Atelier Painting Bootcamp online. So it's $500 a month. And you get critiques from me twice a week. You can also post your stuff for critiques in between the critique times for feedback. And it's really the way, if you're serious about atelier training, if you really want to learn this skill set, I know it's scary. I know it's hard. I know it's a financial commitment, but it's also, when you learn these skills, you have them for the rest of your life. So there's really a cost benefit happening where every year you wait is another year that you aren't painting your best technical paintings. So if you are interested in atelier training, I really encourage you to check out our online class, and don't be afraid of it. We're really nice in there. And if you really want to paint at your highest levels, at your highest abilities, that's really the next step. All right. All right, so I'm asking myself, do you see how I'm starting to get it straighter here? When you squint your eyes, and this is a thing that you're going to have to squint in order to figure it out. So we want the edge soft and we want it to read straight. Not too high, not too low. Especially watch the end. This is where students tend to mess up the most. They'll kind of whoop up or whoop down at the end. So just some clarity on the blending. I push from one side and then push from the other, and it's kind of a back and forth wrestling match until it lands where I want it to be. I typically suggest pushing your light into your dark first, because most often your dark pigment's stronger than your light pigment. But in this case, I'm working with titanium white, which is pretty powerful. So they're about equally matched. I also want to point out that it's tempting to just only go across when you're trying to create a line. But if you're trying to create a soft edge, do you see how I'm using these small vertical strokes? You're going to get a really harsh edge if you rely entirely on going back and forth here. All right, so my edge is softening, but it's a little still sharp. I want it even fuzzier. based on what I'm seeing. So I'm going to extend the amount of time it takes to go from the light color to the dark color here. Okay, so just continuing to work, continuing to soften. So, an edge, a really soft edge is just really a gradient from color one to color two, right? Okay, so now I have the softness, but now if you squint, do you see how it's making a slight arc? And so I need to determine whether the light color needs to go up or the dark color needs to come down. It looks like the light color needs to come up. All right, we're getting there. People really dismiss background sometimes. They're like, "Oh, blah, 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 blah," and they just throw it in without much thought. And it can really kill a painting. I mean, you can have a perfectly painted sphere. And if you aren't thoughtful about the way you paint your background, it's not going to feel believable because the space and its environment is not believable. Oops. And again, watch the ending. It's common for students to let it tilt up or tilt down at the very end. I could spend the whole hour just working on this. All right. I'm feeling pretty good about that. It's a little low right here. When you're doing a highly refined painting too, it's pretty common that you'll end up doing a second pass, including on your background. Um, how do I feel about that? Is it soft? Is it straight? It feels like it's dipping a touch right here. Okay. I don't really have paint on my brush right now. I'm just trying to smooth out a couple of these transitions. All right. Mm. I've been ignoring the chat for a little bit. Does anybody have any questions about this process? Actually, look at the chat. um, uh, okay, so I see it. There's a few good questions in the chat. Sorry, I got sucked in and I wasn't reading my chat. Okay, so one question is, can you just put this color down, and then an in-between color? Sure, absolutely, that's fine. Sometimes you can get a little bit of a jagged feel in those transitions, but you can always put more and more half values in between there and do it that way. That's totally fine. Um, and also a question about the brush size. Now you can get a softer edge with a big brush too, especially if you're working on a big canvas. So it's not that you have to, it's just that I guess that's the method I've developed over time. So I use the soft brush. Um, okay, so we have more or less I'm just gonna paint this just because it's weird when it stops being painted when I painted it up here. Um, Okay, so now while I have the small brush, I'm going to tidy up this edge of our sphere here. Again, being very mindful about the edge of our sphere. And we also have this transition here. So not only do I have to be careful about the sphere, I have to make sure that I'm giving it an appropriate transition because we have the gradient over here from the cast shadow of the left edge of the box. All right. Slow and steady. Take your time. Especially anytime you go near the edge of that sphere. And I want you to notice how actually pretty amazing it is that you can now that we have almost everything surrounding the sphere in, do you see how the sphere is starting to look really three-dimensional even though we have nothing on here yet? Just from giving it a good environment, right? And so I want you to pay attention to this because people really discount the environments of their subjects, and it makes or break it'll make or break your painting. And you can get dimensionality just from creating a good environment, especially when we get this cast shadow in. Um, Okay. All right. So just like in watercolor, indeed. People tell me all the time too. I get asked this a lot about the online class. People are like, "Oh, well, you're teaching oil painting, but I'm really a watercolorist or a pastel artist or whatever." But the thing about atelier training, like, it doesn't matter as much which materials you're using. Yes, there's a little bit of learning curve with each material, pastel versus watercolor versus oil. But the real truth is that atelier training trains your eyes to see better, right? And the media that you're using is part of that, but it's not the important part. It's like, how well is your eye trained to see? Because, I haven't touched watercolors in probably 10 years, but my drawing skills are just as good in watercolor as they are in oil. My color skills are just as good in watercolor as they are in oil. The difference is the paint handling skills. There's a little bit of learning curve with each medium on how to get the paint to do what your eye is trained to see. But once your eye is trained, the media doesn't matter. You look at people like Sargent who were great watercolorists, but they trained in oil to learn how to paint in watercolor, right? So um, it's it's hard because for whatever reason in today's art society, we're like, oh, I want to go learn watercolor. So I need to go to a watercolor specialist or an oil specialist or a pastel specialist. And that's fine if you're new to the media and want to learn how to handle it. But what you need is atelier training, right? Like if you want to draw or paint or watercolor or pastel realistically, you need the level of training that atelier training gives you if you want to create atelier level works. And the media is irrelevant to that, more or less. So that's my soapbox for today. Okay, so back to the cast shadow here. We said this is an 8.5, and it stays pretty dark overall. Like it probably ends at maybe a 6 over here. But I'm going to start putting in right away. Now, we again have an edge, right? So we're painting one shape that's meeting an outside shape. That means we have an edge. And we talked about this a little bit already, but the edge is on this is slightly sharper here than it is over here, because the further away the shadow gets from your object, the more room for bouncing light there is to get into your cast shadow. There's something that we call inkiness in a shadow, or like making a black hole shadow. And this is often when students just take one dark value, like an 8.5, and just paint the whole shadow, right? And it looks like you're falling into a black hole. It's ruining the environmental effect. It's not taking into account the bouncing light, right? There's no such thing as a perfect shadow. So if you have a sharp edge shadow, that's one value, it's going to look inky. It's going to look like you're going to fall into it, and it's going to ruin your environment. So by adjusting our edge to get softer as we go across and adjusting our color to let a little bit of that bouncing light in, it will maintain the environment that we've worked so hard to build for the sphere. Okay, so I'm going to use my small brush because I'm going to start over here, and this is a small space. Always try to use a brush that's proportionate to the space you're working in. You can save yourself a lot of technique. Again, anytime you go near your sphere, careful, careful. All right. And then it gets lighter as it gets further away from the sphere. So I'm going to, while I'm working with my sphere, just go up a value step here. Okay. All right, so now what I'm going to do is just roughly paint this in, and then we'll start treating the edges as we go. So again, on the darker side, directly underneath the sphere, an 8.5, we said. And then it gets a little lighter the further away it gets from the sphere. I also want to point out, make sure you're using enough paint on your brush to actually cover the canvas. You don't want these little white specks coming through your canvas. That messes with your ability to see the value and the color cleanly, because it's throwing in white into whatever it is that you've painted on top. All right, I'm not being very careful around this edge because it's going to be a soft edge. Or it's going to get soft. All right, I am going to push in a little bit on that edge that I overdid. That wasn't quite light enough. Remember the edges are like a push and pull situation. So even though it's sharper underneath here, it's not like perfectly sharp. It has a tiny bit of um, a softness to it. But, just be extra, extra careful anytime you're painting around the outline of the sphere. This does take some paint handling skill and practice to really control paint, and a thin, soft edge is definitely a little bit of practice. Um, but this is still pretty sharp, so we're gonna buzz it up a little bit. You can see that the drawing is coming and going as I'm softening the edge. Um, we can always restate the drawing. We found it once, we can find it again. Sometimes students are really, really paranoid. And I know I'm being a little hypocritical, right? Because I'm like, do not lose the edge of your sphere. But then I'm like, oh, it's okay if we lose the edge of this shadow a little bit. Um, okay, so there's a question about the reflection of the sphere into the shadow. So what's happening is it's mostly the light that's in the shadow is mostly being reflected from the ground plane, the back plane, and the side plane. Now, there is a little bit of reflected light, in the shadow side of the sphere, but I don't want to talk about that right now until we start painting the sphere. But the reflected light in the sphere does actually reflect the teeniest bit more light down here, but I don't want you to really consider that because it's important to understand that the majority of the light down here is actually being bounced in from the environment and not the shadow side of the sphere. But just like with all other edges, it's going to be a little bit of a fight back and forth. As I'm looking, when I'm up close, I'm like, oh yeah, my edge is getting soft. When I stand back, it's still reading quite sharp. And my light just changed. So this time of day, because of the low trajectory of the sun in the winter, my studio has a weird reflective thing going on. So I'm going to throw in some screens to kind of minimize all that extra light that just very suddenly got bounced into our subject here. So give me just a minute, put my screens up. Learning your light and learning your studio, like anytime you move studio, pay very, very, very careful attention to what your light's doing, how it's doing it, when it's doing it. Because especially new students, they will just start repainting everything thinking that they're crazy, right? Like, oh, I thought it was red and now it's yellow and now I have to repaint everything. Or I thought it was dark and now it's light and I have to repaint everything. So just try to be mindful of your studio and oh, I don't know if knock you guys off. Does anybody else get the irony of me saying pay attention to your environment as I knock a screen into my easel? Okay, there we go. um, so there's a question. Yes, it's true. At least I'm not copying that onion. I think is working, and I did slice it, so that's exciting. Um, okay, what was I doing? Oh, we were painting this. We're working on our soft edge. It's going to get softer and softer as it goes across. I'm going to go ahead and paint in the empty part. Use my bigger brush because it's a fairly big space here. Now it's still a shadow, but we talked about how it gets fairly light as it hits this outside edge. How light is yet to be determined. As we work on the edges, we can also adjust the values. And again, just like how we did with this background, do you see how we're going to get a point if we make this a really sharp shadow here? So we might want to put some passage there as well, just as a painting, just for aesthetic purposes so that we don't have this distraction. And again, please, please, please be so careful around the sphere part. This edge really gets quite soft towards the end here. I want to be careful again that I'm not losing the shape of it. The endless battle, right? Like you finally get the edge soft as you want it, but then it's not quite the shape that you were going for. Do-do-do-do. So I don't really have new information, just doing the thing that I've been talking about. And yes, it's definitely a learning experience for me as well. Like, I tell my students all the time that they need to be brave. Like, if you want to learn how to paint, you need to be brave. And it's really scary painting in front of people, some of which I know, some of which I don't. I don't know who it's scary to paint in front of, strangers or people you know, right? But if I'm going to ask my students to, take the leap and be brave and do the scary thing and come to critiques, ready for input, I feel like it's really important for me to make sure that I'm still demonstrating bravery or, practicing my bravery too. I was so scared to start this week. Like, I couldn't sleep all weekend, but I'm like, because I intended to start this months ago and I just kept putting it off. Ask my friend Cynthia if she's here today. She's like, "Mandy, you can't keep putting it off. You have to do it." So, Cynthia, if you're watching, thank you for your encouragement and love. We all need support and love, and that's one of the nice things about the online class is you have a whole class of people that are rooting for you and cheering for you. Alright, this is an okay first pass at the sphere. It needs some refinement, but we have an idea down. We have an edge that's sharper going to fuzzier. Um, this darkness looks like it needs to push out just a touch here, shape-wise. And same down here, just a little bit. I think this edge could go way softer. Um, Still go a little softer even. Oh, it really just dissolves here at the end. All right, how do I feel about that? Shape-wise, it needs to come down a little bit. Oh, edge plus shape, that is a skill that requires definitely some practice, and a few tries. That's starting to feel better. I feel like it's a little too inky in here, that the interior could be lightened just a little bit, lighter than what I have it so far. And sorry, I've been ignoring the comments again. So Ellen's saying, I love the soft edges. I was really looking forward to seeing how you do this. Thank you. Yes, you're welcome. Creating a soft edge, it's a whole paint handling technique. So seeing other people do it, often when artists are demonstrating, we have 1 hour or 2 hours, right? It's not as common where you see what I'm doing in this class, where I'm just going as slow as I need to both explain and do it, not in the shorthand way, but in the actual way that I do it in my own practice, right? So that's the advantage of having infinite time is that, we can really slow down and learn some of these techniques. Um, it is a little scary, Leola, to paint in front of people you don't know, but harder, um, but better when you paint before people won't hold back their critique. That is so true. And for both better or worse. So like when I first started training, I was married and my ex-husband, he could always be like, oh, something's off with the nose or something's off with the ear or something is off with the vase. He could always say that something didn't look right. He didn't know how to fix it or how to help me fix it. But it was infuriating that this person who had no training and frankly was not interested in art at all could could like tell where something was wrong, and even more aggravating that they couldn't help you fix it. But it was so aggravating. Oh, from Montana. Hey, Deborah. I used to live in Montana. I used to live in Bozeman. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm a little jealous of you, Deborah, because I left Montana to get my atelier training. I moved to Seattle because there wasn't atelier training in Montana at that time. And now you get to stream this atelier class. I'm a little bit jealous of you right now. Excellent. I'm so glad that you're caught up. Um, Peter says worth being married just for that. All right, I'm just going to lighten up the sphere overall. We're getting a lot of bouncing light. We have a white object. It's on a white cloth. So there's just a lot of bouncing light in here, and we want it really atmospheric. You see how much atmosphere that added, just lightening that one area? And I even think that that lightness can pull in just a touch in here. Right, I have a tiny bit of a halo effect. Now, I'm actually seeing it get a tiny bit darker on this edge because it's on a cloth that's slightly bumpy, and I'm trying to decide whether I like that effect, and I kind of do. I think I kind of want to keep it. I am realizing that this edge, though, is still too harsh. So I'm going to continue softening this edge here. All right, so I softened it, but now I have lumps that need addressed. You know, we need the shape and the edge, and sometimes we get the edge and lose the shape. So, all right. Just a little dark right here. Oops, that was way too light. Try not to panic if you do something like that. Like, just slow down. If you're panicking, take a step away before you make any brash decisions. Sometimes we put a note down that we don't want, and then we panic and we put another bad note down. And the next thing you know, we've smeared out a whole mess. Okay. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Um, all right. Just see a few areas like this is a little harsh. Um, the tiniest bit here. Okay. There is a little bit of more softness on this edge as well. I've made this just a little harsh. It's not quite so intense there. All right. I keep thinking, okay, just one more thing, one more thing. That's kind of how painting goes. I'm gonna call that for today. We're 2 minutes past our typical end time, but I'm so glad, that you all could be here, and welcome, Noelle, from the Midlands of Ireland. I'm so excited to see Ireland represented today. We have Minnesota, although, I know some of, the people here travel around quite a bit. Um, Yes, and Ellen's just pointing out too, when I was lightening this, how we're trying to avoid the inkiness, right? And so at the very end, how by softening this edge, it did lighten it slightly and got rid of that inky feeling in our painting. So, atelier training is about nuance. I think it was Michael Jordan who said that like there's no magic secret. Like the trick is doing the basics better than everybody else, right? Dribble the ball better than everybody else, throw the ball better than everybody else, right? And it's really true. Like, all of you right now comprehend the idea of a value scale 1 through 9. It's a matter of how good you are at using it, how refined you are at using it, what the level is. So, everything you need to do at this point to paint an image like this, but what you need is that refinement, and that's what the online class can help give you, is accelerate your learning. So I hope you'll consider checking out our online atelier painting bootcamp. Oh, and welcome from Spokane. Excellent. Okay, so that is all for today. I do not stream on the weekends, but starting on Monday, we'll actually paint the sphere. And actually, we have to do this ground or front plane, sorry, and then we'll paint the sphere. But I know I did promise you that we were painting a sphere, and I promise you we are painting a sphere. But I hope what you learned this week is that painting a realistic object, no matter what it is, it won't matter if the environment isn't right. So. Anyways, thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday. Happy weekend, everybody.